So what is modern capitalist settler colonialism? Well, this is a certain pattern in modern history where we see a surplus population within the capitalist world coming under pressure, socioeconomic pressure, political pressure to exit the boundaries of that world and to venture out into the, as of yet, non-capitalist parts of the planet. The settlers usually do this, at least initially, with the backing of an already existing capitalist state, which acts as a metropole to the colony. Though the settlers may very well outgrow this dependency and eventually fight for independence, probably in order to go forward with colonization with full force. Now, the settlers in their area of settlement inevitably encounter other human beings. I mean, since prehistory, wherever on Earth there has been flora and fauna, there has existed some human population sustaining itself through that flora and fauna. Now, whether the people encountered by the settlers are the original inhabitants of the land, whatever that means, is not important to our story. The important point is that at the time of colonization, the people inhabiting the land and making use of its resources do so in an unproblematic manner. They just live there, perhaps for generations, unaware that their existence or way of life should be contested by anyone, but this changes, of course, with the arrival of the first settlers. This is not to say that the local population never had experience with another human group appearing in their area and wishing to also make use of the resources, which may then be negotiated in one way or another, peacefully or with force. But with the arrival of the settlers, it's a different story altogether. Modern capitalist settler colonialism poses a unique and total threat to the local inhabitants' way of life and even to their very existence. You see, the settlers bring with them very strange practices. They enclose the land with fences. They engage in intensive agriculture. They commercialize all social relations. And eventually they industrialize. And in so doing, the settlers radically clash with the local population over the issue of the distribution and use of local resources, most notably land. The goal of the settlers is to liberate land, a precious resource, from an unproductive population, so as to allow the establishment of a rational, flourishing society, which is to say a capitalist society that will be owned by themselves, and that will completely change the face of the entire land. And in order to legitimize this usurpation against existing property relations, the settlers come armed with a certain ideology, with a certain theory of private property. This was very much the philosophical project of John Locke, the 17th century Englishman who was invested in the colonization of North America. According to Locke's theory, private property, by which we mean an exclusive right to make use of a certain resource, comes about when, for example, a certain piece of land is first put to use in a process of production for profit. So you see, according to this theory, and very conveniently for the settlers, the fact that a given land is already sustaining the existence of another human population is irrelevant if this is brought about in a primitive and wasteful manner. In other words, if a given land has yet to be subjected to a capitalist mode of production, it is to be seen as empty, virgin soil. And so the settlers see the local inhabitants not so much as human beings worthy of property rights, but rather as merely an aspect of the natural scenery. They expect them to simply give way in the face of civilization, and eventually to wither away along with the wild forests and the wild beasts. However, very soon the local inhabitants do assert their humanity by resisting the settlers' appropriation of natural resources, and so a conflict develops. At first, perhaps a family of settlers builds a fence around some piece of land, not knowing that it has been used as a common ground for hunting or for grazing. The local inhabitants then either dispute the settlers' claim to have absolute and exclusive dominion over that piece of land, or perhaps they don't even understand this strange concept of private property. And so they simply ignore the sign and carelessly venture into the enclosed land in order to hunt or to graze. Now, the settlers, of course, are outraged at the sight of this transgression, and they punish the thieves, who then retaliate in kind. And so gradually what begins as local and sporadic property disputes coalesces into a clash of civilizations, a struggle between two human communities with radically different approaches to the question of property, each seeing the other as a transgressor and more as an existential threat. Each group tries to eliminate the other's troublesome presence in the area, either by exemplary violence meant to instill fear or terror, or by systematically attacking the very conditions of life of the rival community, destroying homes, burning crops, slaughtering farm animals, as well as slaughtering the people themselves. The war is total and the violence is indiscriminate, which means that women, children, and the elderly compose the majority of the victims on both sides. Yet the settlers don't see this violence as a symptom of a tragic relationship which they have had a part in creating. Rather, they see the violence of the local inhabitants as an expression of their evil essence. Thomas Jefferson, for example, referring to the Native Americans, wrote of, quote, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So you see, the settlers go from ignoring the political significance of the local inhabitants to seeing them as absolute devils. And this then serves as yet another justification for the settler colonial project. The settlers' takeover of resources is portrayed as a just punishment against a murderous race of people, despite the fact that in reality the settlers' violence against the local inhabitants is far more destructive and lethal, and may very well reach the level of genocide. Paradoxically, local resistance is seen as aggression, while foreign conquest is seen as defense. Now, I don't want to demonize the settlers. We wouldn't be doing justice to the complexity and the tragedy of history if we didn't try to find empathy to all characters in our story. And indeed, the settlers are very much themselves the victims of the historical role that they have taken upon themselves, initially unsuspecting the full implications of this settler project. As they see it, they are the underdog. I mean, they are initially propertyless people who very traumatically leave their place of birth behind and venture into an unknown land with a beautiful dream of freedom and prosperity. Initially, it is not clear that they are the superior power in the land. At first, the demographic advantage of the local inhabitants, as well as their knowledge of the land, allows them to inflict devastating harm on the settlers, who are understandably fearful for their survival. Only with time, the settlers become more powerful through their technological and organizational capital, as well as through the support of a metropole state. They inevitably see this increasing power and their victories as a confirmation of their virtues and as a reward for their sacrifice. And they inevitably learn to see the oppression or even the destruction of their fierce enemies as a necessary condition for their own existence and way of life. Now, if you look at the history of the Zionist project in the land between the river and the sea, you find this pattern of relationship exactly between Zionists and Palestinians since the end of the 19th century until today. The Zionist case fits this pattern to a T.